Good evening, folks. This is your beach update for the 19th and the 20th. Yeah, it's only fitting. You know, the party that claims that because there are a couple of crazy white supremacists that are allegedly going to show up in Virginia tomorrow. By the way, I am not going to that rally. The probability of something really bad happening up there is quite real. I understand if you feel you should go, then do so, but do pay attention to your surroundings. All right, and that's all I'm gonna say about that, because there is a real possibility that you're going to have some agitprops out there. In fact, I fully expect that that's exactly what's going to happen, and they're going to try to start something. So, have your head on a swivel and keep your nose down. Peaceful protest is perfectly fine, folks, but do not get roped into doing something dumb. Let's put it that way. I mean, if you decide that today is the day you're going to storm the Bastille, well, no, that's a different story. But that's a decision that you make with full knowledge of what you're doing and the consequences. The consequences are likely to be severe. Don't kid yourself about what they're going to be, because they are going to be severe. And this is going to be a big deal. Okay, second thing. There is a really, really nasty bug going around. And I don't know exactly what its scope is. I know China is talking about some kind of coronavirus, or so they think, that is responsible for pneumonia and some really bad problems. But we have a really nasty flu season kicking off here. The shot, as is not unusual, is essentially ineffective. I never take it anyway, primarily because the one time that I did, I got sicker than a dog. And frankly, I don't know if that was just because it was a bad match, although the CDC said it wasn't. The CDC said that year it was a very good match. However, it didn't make a bit of difference. Within a couple of weeks of getting the shot, I got the worst case of the flu I think I've had in probably 20 or 30 years. I mean, we're talking the pukes and, the whole 9 yards, a week of being essentially worthless. I got a mild version of it. I still have a little bit of a cough, but it was about a day and a half that I felt pretty miserable. Although I never ran a really high fever, it just really screwed with me. So I mean, this one's pretty ugly, folks. When I get hit hard enough that it really makes me just think, all right, I really don't want to do anything today. That's unusual for me. I think I've had maybe one or two of those over the last 5 or 10 years. They've been bad enough that I've actually considered, hey, let's just, hit the rack and stay there, and maybe gargle with some single malt scotch. But if, in terms of what you can do about it, to avoid it, other than good hygiene, making sure you wash your hands and things like that, there's really not much. This is one of those bugs that if it gets you, and that's just the way it goes. So, pay attention, but there you are. All right, now let's talk about impeachment, because, oh my God. McConnell has his organizing resolution ready. There is apparently the ability for the defense, that would be Trump's side, to motion for dismissal at several different points. Now, that's rather interesting. Because if there you go, that's kind of an interesting situation. The thing about that is that I don't think the Senate would entertain a straight up motion to dismiss. However, I do like the idea of having it out there as a sword of Damocles over shithead's head. And by the way, I have read their missive. All right, God, can I have the hour-ish of my time back that I spent on that, please? Folks, when you get down to it, there's two realities that you can't get past when it comes to impeachment. The first thing is that impeachment is a political process. It's not a judicial process. It always has been. It always will be. That's how it's defined in the Constitution. But it does specify high crimes and misdemeanors, and high crimes are, of course, what we all know. But misdemeanors is also modified by the word high. So it is high crimes and high misdemeanors. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, no, that's not really. Yes, it is. Folks, you cannot, just like you cannot say shall not be infringed doesn't really mean shall not be infringed. You can't put words into the Constitution that weren't there, and you can't take them away from what was there at the time that it was written. And that's just all there is to it. That's the way it works, period, end of discussion, full stop. And the facts of the matter are that high crimes and misdemeanors are high crimes and high misdemeanors. Okay, high modifies both. The problem with the second article is that the second article doesn't even allege a offense. Okay, obstruction of Congress is not an offense. Telling Congress to pound sand because you believe that there's a separation of powers issue is not impeachable, period, end of discussion, full stop. Now, what might be is obstruction of justice. That's a different story, but obstruction of justice can't happen until the court process has run on whatever challenges are cited. So if you get a subpoena, you tell Congress to pound sand, they then sue you, they take you to court to try to enforce it, okay? And they say, no, you can't tell us to pound sand. You have to actually produce what we said. There is an adversarial process. You get to the end of that adversarial process. The judge whatever, wherever that ends up, okay? I mean, if you push it far enough, it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. If at the end of that process you get told, no, fuck off, produce the documents or produce the testimony or whatever it is that was demanded, and then you tell Congress to pound sand, now we've got an obstruction of justice charge. Now you actually have something that's impeachable. That would be a legitimate thing to turn around and say, okay, jackass, we're going to nail you for that one. And that would be a perfectly legitimate charge under those circumstances. But that's not what's happened here. And so we need to keep in mind that there is a very real problem in the context of this impeachment nonsense, in that there was no crime and there was no misdemeanor. And so in the sense of the second article, at least, there's just nothing, there's no there. And I don't understand how people are thinking that there is. Okay, now, abuse of power. Well, that one's a little bit more nebulous, and that is a place that we can reasonably go. But I want to point out what has come out in the mainstream media over the last couple of days. And this to me, and that is that the argument that President Trump has made originally was that Hunter Biden was part of a corrupt process with his father, Joe, and that this corruption extended into the realm of United States aid, which made it his issue. Now, corruption by itself may or may not reach far enough for the president or our government, for that matter, to be able to get involved in interrupting aid and things like this. But corruption that actually reaches into the realm of United States taxpayer money is another thing entirely. To the extent that that is going on, it is a perfectly legitimate process within the executive. And for those of you that say, well, but this agency or that agency said there was no problem, we are now learning that it appears that essentially every member of Biden's family was on the take somewhere. These articles are not things that came out of, the conservative treehouse or some other, far right leaning, wingnut blog somewhere. These are articles that have been published in the mainstream press. And I suggest that you go read them. They're pretty damning. They point to a pattern of the Biden family using their father during his time as vice president of the United States as a means to advance themselves with his knowledge. Now, you can go ahead and you can make any argument you want when somebody pulls something like this without the knowledge of the person who is actually the politician. It belies, it's very tough to make that argument stick, because it's extraordinarily rare that somebody is going to be wildly successful and someone else is not, within their family is not going to start asking questions about how they're doing it. I mean, never mind that. Tell me that around the Thanksgiving dinner table, you don't start talking about it. Of course you do. So the idea that this was somehow secret is a different thing. But this goes even further than that, because the direct allegations have been made that not only was it not secret, but that everybody knew what was going on. And if in fact that is the case, then what we have here is not just a legitimate investigation. Whether it was aimed at a political rival or not is irrelevant. But we have a level of corruption that is, frankly, off the charts. Okay? It is not unusual for, and oh, by the way, if you wonder why the Democrats are all up in arms about this, it goes to the not unusual part of it. And it's this. There are plenty of indications that Pelosi's children and relatives are also involved in this sort of thing. She's not the only one. There are plenty of indications that the relatives of congressmen and congresswomen on both sides of the aisle are involved in this on a regular basis. You do remember what happened in Baltimore, right? And Cummings and his wife. I mean, this kind of thing is not even close to being an infrequent or uncommon kind of occurrence. And by the way, this has cost politicians their jobs, and in some cases has gotten thrown in jail, along with their spouses and along with their children and such, especially when they themselves get into politics and then twist things around like this. So the idea that this is somehow over the line to bring this up is just bullshit. But to the extent that this is actually interfering in foreign policy, and this is, boy, folks, you'd better, those of you on the left side of the aisle, I understand that you think that Donald Trump is a five-alarm prick and that he ought to be thrown out of office just because he's orange and all of that. But I'm going to tell you right now that if you think that it is appropriate for, or for that matter, that it shouldn't result in arrest, trial, and punishment for treason when someone turns around and uses their parent's position or another person in their family's position to tamper with foreign policy in an area of the world that is less than stable, where people are getting shot, you really do have a screw loose. This is not yet proved. But when I see, this stuff, this stuff about Hunter Biden, it makes, when you look at just the basic set of facts, the man was tossed out of the military for drug abuse. Right? He was caught with drugs in his system. The exact details of what sort of discharge he got has not been revealed. But the fact of the matter is that he was caught stoned on cocaine. He has a long history of very severe drug abuse. He claims to have no money, and yet there was tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars that were funneled into his pocket. Where in the hell did it all go? I have many times throughout my life watched people in entertainment and such that have gotten wrapped up in drug abuse on a very serious matter, and you read about them in the paper. And, the stories are sad, but at the end of the day, you look at this, you go, oh my God, how in the hell did you blow, $10 million or $20 million or $50 million? Folks, it is the amount of money that can get siphoned out of your wallet by that sort of circumstance is unreal. And the further up you are in the food chain and the better your connections, the more you tend to pay. The guy in the street that buys or hell, for that matter, if you're in a state where cannabis is legal, you go buy a bag of weed or a couple of joints or an eighth of an ounce or whatever, and you smoke it, and there's some money there. But you hear about people that supposedly celebrities that supposedly smoked up tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you just kind of sit back and you say, how in the hell could you possibly do that? Or you can go out to Colorado, you can go into any of these places, and I don't see how you can spend that kind of money. But when you start getting into drugs of serious abuse, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, other opiates, other Percocets, barbiturates, all sorts of things that are sold on the black market that you and I and everybody else would not even dream of going out and buying. I mean, hey, listen, I have a beer here right next to me that's perfectly good. The amount of money that evaporates out of your life that way, and not just by yourself, but because this sort of thing has a social component to it or whatever have you, there tends to be a multiplicative effect. I have seen multiple people destroy themselves this way, including a couple that I know, and one in my family. And this is the kind of thing where you will not get sober until you want to be sober. But if you think that this sort of siphoning off is somehow, that you would hire somebody to be a director in a company that has zero qualifications within field, and his best and highest qualification is that he's a drug addict. May I ask what the hell you're consuming? This is just not reality, folks. It never has been and never will be. I think you need to step back a decent amount here, take a chill pill a little bit to some extent, and think about what you're really putting forward here is what you believe is going on, because it's pretty clear that that's not the case. And when it comes to the mainstream media digging this up and finding that, no, it's not just Hunter Biden, it's the entire Biden family and everybody associated with Joe, you can see why, everybody tried to keep it focused on Hunter. Oh, he's just a dope head. Well, what if that's not the truth? What if the truth is that it's all of them? And then the next question is, why would you believe it's just Biden? We already know that the Pelosis are involved in all sorts of things. What is their grand contribution to America other than being named Pelosi? Tell me what the difference is. And this is a problem, and I don't think people are paying attention to it in the way they should. But in any event, that's what we got for today. Probably be not doing an update tomorrow. But, when Tuesday, everybody goes back to business, everyone goes back to work, blah, 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 blah. Maybe I'll do something then. But that's my peachy update for today. I just, folks, both sides of the aisle, I know that, people are going to jump all over the Biden thing if you're on the right. Okay, but if you're on the left, come on, man, get real about this. You tell me that it's realistic that Biden's entire effing family is profiting off the fact that the man's the vice president of the United States, and doing so not just domestically, but in foreign policy aspects as well. There's something deeply crooked about that, and if you don't want to see that stopped, my opinion, you're not American. That's my view.